Hello and welcome to the Hello Content walkthrough, where we're going to go through all of the parts of our Hello Content project. The purpose of our Hello Content project is to really show off our content system, and that all begins in the Google spreadsheet. This is where we're defining everything. And you'll notice we have a configs sheet, a characters sheet, images sheet, languages, and strings. And in configs, we're only really defining one thing, which is our default character is Sandy, and Sandy is defined at characters. And if we look at our characters sheet, we have Robert, Maria, Sandy, Charles. Here's their pictures. We have now these images. This is just a preview, so this isn't like real information that we're going to be able to grab. In fact, we're ignoring this. This is really for the person adding content. We can even look at the cell, and it's going to be a VLOOKUP on the images sheet. So let's go to images, and here we have basically IDs for these images. And this ID is the same as the sprite, but we're going to use the sprite to actually look up a sprite ID. So that's the way that works. And we're going to fake localization. So, you might have localization where you're going to have a custom font, and you might have left to right. In this case, we don't have that. We just have, these three languages: English, Spanish, and French. And in our strings table, we're basically defining all of those strings. So let's look at our Unity project. Now that we're in our Unity project, the first thing I want to do is run a test to make sure everything's working correctly. So I'm going to go to Window, General, Test Runner. We only have one test. Let's run it. And it passed. Let's take a look at the test. Here's our Hello Content test. And we're testing our Hello Content SO. So here we're getting an ID, and we sync to that ID. So now we're going to have access to the fields on Hello Content SO. Let's just take a look at Hello Content SO. Hello Content SO basically maintains a character. So it's going to start out as pointing to that default character. So SC is how we access our content, and SOs can use SC, whereas if you're in the controller or anywhere in the client, you're going to use CC. And that's because the SC is the server content, and it's a lot lighter than the client content because we have memory restrictions, or we want the less memory we use, the less our stack is going to cost us to run. So we use SC, and we have access to that default character. So let's go back to our content. So in configs, one thing I want you to notice is that we have a $sign config, and that means it's going to be available into the server content option. So that's why we can use it in SC. And we really only do one thing in this SO, which is we set our character to whatever the client tells us to set our character to. We have this select character handler, and that's about it. So going back to the test, the first thing we're going to make sure of is that content came in correctly, so we have more characters than 0. We fully expect to have all of our characters that we've looked at, and we fully expect that that Hello SO's character ID at the beginning is the same as the default. And then we're going to, for each character, we're going to set Hello Contents SO to that character, and we're just going to make sure that that character has actually been set. So it's a pretty standard test here, nothing too fancy. At the end, we just try to set it to a bad character ID, and we make sure that it did not get set to that bad character ID. That, in fact, our SO was smart enough to say, okay, I'm just going to ignore this bad information. So that is working. So for our next step, let's actually play the game. For such a simple SO, we're going to see a lot of functionality. The reason is because we have all of that great data that's just going straight to the client. So one thing we can do is we can switch up our localization here, and we can switch our characters. And that's basically it. Let's run through the hierarchy and see what was required to get all of that set up. So first place we're going to look at is the controller. There's Hello Content Controller. Hello Content Controller, we have a syncer, we have our Hello SO, we have loading states. So our initial state should be loading. Let's see, where's that? Right here. So once we wake up, we set it to our loading state to loading. And then eventually, once syncer has come through and we're doing an await syncer sync. So basically this is gonna block a little until syncer is ready to go. And at that point we're going to say loading complete. We also get a reference to our Hello SO, and we stick it in the data store. HC player stands for Hello Content Player. So we're going to be able to access everything on our Hello Content SO. And we also set our language to English. And then obviously as we push buttons, we can change that language, which is handled down here. This is the callback for selecting a language. And all it does is it iterates through all of the strings in the strings table, and it will create a new link where content.strings dot whatever that ID in the strings table dot loc is going to now point to that language we selected, which means if we do things correctly and we only refer to content.strings.someid.loc in our application, this will automatically update everything to the correct location. So that's a great example of how to handle localization. The other thing we have as far as buttons you could push is you can select a character, and we can recognize this line from our test where we're just sending hello content SO the select character message, and it's going to update that inside the server object. So let's go back to our hierarchy, and in Canvas we have this chair select, and it has some text. It's a select character, and then it has our character list, and we use a list VB for that. And one thing I want to show you guys is we can open up the Data Store Explorer. Because we ran the game, this is all populated. So when we look at our variables, we can compare them to the Data Store Explorer. So here our variable is content.characters. So let's look at that. So we're essentially setting our list to these characters. And there's a prop mapper. There's always a prop mapper with every list. And this prop mapper is giving the game objects under this list, button and text, it's creating a prop object for it, which will give it access to all of these things, like the it's going to create this button for Robert, and Robert will have the information for its name, image, ID, wins, losses, and KD. And you could say that about everybody in this list. Robert, Maria, Sandy, Charles. We're going to create button. Prop Mapper is going to create those buttons for them automatically and give those buttons that data. So here is our button that points to the code we just saw within the controller, the select character code. And here is our text, and text uses a text view binding, and its variable is props, which is essentially one of these guys, dot name, which is this, dot loc. So that's how that's set up. So now let's go down to our card. This is the character we selected, and it has a name. So HC player, as you recall, that's our alias. Dot character, dot name, dot loc. Dot loc is so we get the correct localization. In this case, it doesn't really matter because we didn't localize names. If we go to photo, we have an image VB. Hello content player dot character dot image dot sprite, because that's what image VB needs to display the correct image. Wins, the label says the word wins dot loc, and so that's localized. Then a colon, and then the value is again the player SO alias right here. Hello content player dot character dot wins. Losses looks just like wins, so does kill deaths. Connecting is a select child VB, so remember how we set that loading variable inside the data store. Here loading is going to be complete, but for a brief amount of time it was set to loading, and while it's set to loading, this state is going to be active, this game object, and this game object is just a loading screen. If we open it up, it just says the connecting screen, and that's also localized. Content.strings.connecting.loc. And header is just the title of the game, but again, we're localized using our text VB and content.strings.title.loc. Let's look at that. Content.strings.title.loc. Hello content. And we can also look at, our spreadsheet to see where this all came from. So content.strings is right here. .title, we have the English, Spanish, and French, and .loc will, remember we had that alias, so it's going to hit the correct localization. We also have our language select up here. Here's our language list. It's very similar to our character selector. Only notable detail that's different is here we have multi-value, so we're not just sending it the language, but also the text that goes with that language. So if you look at button, it's gonna set its ID based on props.lang, which was set up here. Props.lang is the language. Let's look at that. Content, languages. So it's either going to be EN, ES, or FR. And then we have this text, which is props.text. So what's props.text? Props.text is content.string.language. So let's look at that. Content.string.language. And we have ID, language for EN. The text is going to be English. The text for ES is going to be Espanol. The text for FR is going to be French. And that's it. So I hope you have got a clear understanding of how Hello Content is made up. In this video, we were able to get the unit test running and look at what it was doing. And then we were able to play the game, open up the Data Explorer, see how the game affected the data, and then look at the hierarchy to see how all of the UI was put together. And one thing which is pretty cool, is this is an example of not needing to write any custom code to get the UI connected with content and with the server objects. So we just used all of the provided view bindings. So that was really exciting too. I hope you learned a lot. Thank you.